Let me start off by just kind of welcome you officially, letting you know that there are 58 of us in this space for the next 6 meetings. Well, actually, students won't be with us on Friday, but at least on Fridays, there'll be 58 of us. And that represents at least 15 colleges. I recounted this morning, it might have been 18, 19 colleges, both the US and Canada. I think we've got a student from University of Toronto with us, all around the United States, West Coast, East Coast, Florida, New York. I'm looking at what I see here: Florida, New York, California, Maryland, Virginia. I mean, this is what a great panoply of what America looks like. And, you know, more than anything else, I think we're at a period in time where getting together as a community, this is one of the things that this kind of virtual space allows us to do, is to get together coast to coast, border to border, crossing borders, to get together and talking about important issues, of which looking at issues of peace building, social justice, and the effects of the pandemic are really important. We have gotten together in this way, not in this form, but as we'll say, a community college community since 2013. This is the 8th time that we have held a seminar for community college faculty on peace building. The first year it was held at Montgomery College, which is just outside of Washington. Then there were several years we held it at Northern Virginia Community College, which is just south of Washington. And then the last 2 years we've held it at George Mason University. The reason for holding it in Washington really focused on this notion that bringing people to Washington allowed them to be exposed. Yeah, I'm going to ask everybody to turn their microphones off. That would be great.
Yeah, but do you want anything for Indigo?
Yeah, so there's somebody still has their microphone on. If they can turn it off. Alana?
Doesn't know, isn't it?
If you can turn your microphone off. You can, oh great, that's it. So the idea was to bring people to Washington, to bring educators to Washington, to kind of share with them and expose them, or at least give them a sense of.
Well, it's really costing me some, you know, but.
So Hannah, can I have you put your microphone, turn your microphone off?
I'm still working on my end of the paper as well, with
and
a
I
lot
think
of time
I will see
lag
if I can
now.
do it.
But anyway, so we'll talk again later.
Hannah?
We need to get together this weekend and
yeah, I'm gonna mute everybody, right? Okay, so let me do that.
As a folder for the research paper project. Okay, I'm gonna have to go, Jenny.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna send it to you by email, Hannah.
Thank you.
Okay?
That's perfect.
All right, okay. And I'm gonna mute. So everybody's muted but me. Thank you. So anyhow, so we've been getting together over those years. Sometimes we've had a large group, 20, 30 faculty. Sometimes the groups have been smaller. This is actually the largest group that we've had. And it speaks to the notion of doing things virtually, and that makes a difference for us right now. And maybe that's a great benefit. But the other thing that we did this year is not only do we have 36 faculty and administrators, we have about 23 students. And what I felt was, because we were going virtual, what would have been a good idea was to let students come in for free. I mean, we're always talking about our students and trying to encourage our students to be part of what we're doing. So I thought, well, a nice idea would be to set it up for them to participate at least on Friday. So we have 23 students. So those of you who brought your students today, I'm really very glad and very pleased that you were able to do that. And at least on the Fridays, they will really be part of the conversation as anyone else. So a couple logistical things before we get started. One is that this year, in the past couple of years, we have physically held this at George Mason University. So the partnership has been between George Mason University, you know, and running it. This year, because we were really doing this virtually, we're not partnering with George Mason University. We're actually partnering with the Forage Center for Peacebuilding and Humanitarian Education, which is actually the NGO that I am the president of. So I thought that that would be kind of a different way of doing it, because the Forage Center is involved in this type of education also. So that's who our partner is this year. A couple housekeeping things before we get started. For the faculty, I had sent you faculty and administrators will say, I had sent you a survey, a pre-conference survey to complete. You don't have to complete that right now. I'm just going to kind of let it run for a while. If you can get to it, that would be great. A lot of that is asking you about, why you're here, what are some objectives you're trying to achieve. Now, realize we're meeting over 3 weeks, so a lot of the things that you might say are objectives we may not reach right away, but I'm going to try to make sure I create some space that we can talk about that. If at no other time in the mornings when we get together, every morning early, or there is a last session where we're just going to be doing a lot of wrap up. So do that. The faculty also would have received a survey from the Forage Center from Catherine Kozar with regard to humanitarian education. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at that also. That's really going to be helpful for one of the presentations for tomorrow. So I'm actually going to ask you all to get to that earlier if you can. That would really be helpful, because that really will inform what Jess Bonham-White does tomorrow. For the most part, every session is 45 minutes. There is one exception to that. On the last Friday, we're doing the State Department, the Diplomacy Center, which is now the U.S. Museum on Diplomacy, I think, I can never remember the name, is actually going to do a virtual simulation, and with students. So that session will be a little bit longer, to let you know. And we're actually going a little bit longer one Saturday also with an extra session. So there's going to be a little bit more at a certain point of things that we're going to be doing, just to let you know. But after every 45-minute session, we're going to take a break. So we'll have a break where we won't have, you can ask questions if you want to ask some questions. If you want to just get up and walk around and take a break, that's good too. It doesn't really make any difference before the next session starts. One of the things that I've learned a lot in using Zoom is it takes a lot of fortitude to stay beyond 45 minutes in a Zoom call. And an hour, I think, is really tops. And I know some people have been running conferences that are kind of more in the nature of being like the same number of days that normally you would have done a conference. I was
calm down.
I'm sorry? Okay, I was in a conference. I was in a conference last week with the Alliance, the Association for Conflict Resolution. Yeah, I want to make sure everybody, right? Everybody is muting them. Yeah, I was in a conference with the Association for Conflict Resolution, and it was done over the same number of days that the normal conference would be. And though I liked the effort, I found it was very, very taxing, particularly when I often go to conferences to hang out with folks in the hallway rather than going to sessions. I was kind of forced to go to sessions, which, okay, that's all right. But it was, some of you were nodding your head, right? You go to conferences, then I got to go to the sessions. Can't I just hang out with my friends and catch up, right? And do that kind of thing, right? And so I felt that maybe if staggering this over 6 periods, then, and keeping it just to 2 hours, allowed us some breathing space, and really allowed us, particularly among the faculty, in between each session, right? So we'll be done tomorrow at Saturday, then we will meet the following Friday. If there are things we want to talk about, if we wanted to kind of continue to chat, if we wanted to set up a space to do that, we could do things throughout that. If we just wanted to check out until the next time we met, that would be great also. So we're kind of trying all different types of things, right? One of the things also that I recognized in doing this is that it's really important to create spaces where people have conversations. That seems to be a better way of doing it than the presentation. So I'm really trying to encourage all of the presenters to rather than do kind of the straight PowerPoint, which we will do some PowerPoints, I can't get around that, to create more of the space. in the conversations, generally speaking, I will moderate those conversations. I will monitor the chat box, which will be, because we are using meetings rather than webinar, Zoom webinar, you will put things in the chat box and then I'll pull them out of the chat box. Or if particularly this will probably be more of a case on Saturday because they're a smaller group, I'll just open everybody's microphone and people can just kind of, if I see you open your microphone, that means you're putting in a question. I do want to create that kind of question and answer dynamic if I can. Couple things. If folks anytime during this are having technical issues, what you probably should first do is email Catherine Kozar, who is the administrative assistant, who is my backup for this. And you would have gotten emails from her. It's Catherine at Forage, FORAGE Center, CENTER.org, and email Catherine. I don't think she's on the call this morning, but she's going to be on some calls. Or you can text me, 240-855-4556, 240-855-4556, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. Just to remind you, this is being recorded. You see the little record up there, it's being recorded. So I do encourage people to show themselves, I must tell you though. If you don't want to, maybe because it's being recorded, I can appreciate that. But one of the things that I have learned, that is open your video, I think it improves the presentations of the presenters when they can see the people they're talking to, believe it or not. And it gets away from this anonymity that I think is not a good thing in these kind of Zoom environments. I think if you want to be anonymous, that's fine, that's your choice. But if you can stand we seeing you, being careful about whatever you do, your hair or whatever, just being careful. But you know, if I was in a conference in the front of the room and Carolyn is next to me, she's shaking her head, I'd see you, you know, you'd see me, right? So why can't we see each other now? So I would encourage that, but I recognize that people don't want to do that. Make sure you do have your microphones off, or I'll have to turn it off until you're really posing a question. And the last thing is that we're using the hashtag NCCPS 2020, NCCPS, National Community College Peacebuilding Seminar 2020. If you want to tweet or do anything on that level, then you are welcome to do that. So if you've got questions at this point, what I'm going to do, because I'm going to really stay on time, and I'm going to introduce Jessica Duque and really turn it over to her. And I will, as this is going on, I will see to the chat if there's any questions in the chat. I really want to be on schedule. Jessica will go until 1, and then at 1 to 1:15, we can take a few more questions for Jessica, or we can take a break, okay? I wanna make sure though that, let me see, make sure, Jessica, I'm making you a co-host so that you can share your screen, and I'm going to unmute you. Okay, let's do this. Jessica, how are you?
I'm good, David. Thanks. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah, so thank you for joining us. Let me just say a few things about you before you start. So Jessica Duque is the Outreach and Development Officer at the Institute for Economics and Peace. Many of you know the Institute for Economics and Peace because they bring us the Global Peace Index and other indexes that I've really benefited from and use as educators, and I know some of you have benefited also. And Jessica is based in New York. Her interests include peace research, economic social justice initiatives, and civil rights law. She is a Jeanette K. Watkins Fellow, so you can tell us about that. A highly selective program develops potential promising students to become humane and effective leaders. She is born in Manila and is raised in the greater LA area and currently lives in Brooklyn. So Jessica, I'm turning the floor over to you, and we'll go from there. And Jessica, at any point, I'll be watching the chat box. We can just take questions at the end if you'd rather do that. You can monitor the chat box too. It's really your call completely. We want to make this the best that works for you. So it's in your court.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. As you mentioned, I'm the Outreach and Development Officer at the Institute for Economics and Peace. So the Institute for Economics and Peace is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization that's dedicated to shifting the world's focus to understanding peace as a positive, achievable, and tangible measure of human well-being and progress. So today I'll be sharing research from our flagship report, the Global Peace Index. And what's new about this year is that within the report, we've focused on a number of different aspects within global peace. For example, I'll be covering positive peace, civil unrest, the economic cost of violence, how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected global peace, and tidbits from our newest report, the Ecological Threat Register, which looks at the relationship between environmental change, peace, and levels of resilience. So it's a rather large spread of research that I'll cover, but truly the idea is to give an overarching perspective on the state of global peacefulness today. So a little bit about us. This slide is really meant to demonstrate the type of reach IAP has been able to have. Our work has been picked up by a number of multilateral institutions, universities, most recently the US high school curriculum in the AP Environmental Science classes. So these are our regional offices and where we work. We are an Australian think tank. All of our research is conducted out of our office in Sydney. And that's also where our founder and CEO, Steve Killalay, operates. So the Global Peace Index, it's in its 14th edition and essentially ranks countries according to their level of peacefulness and provides a comprehensive analysis on those trends. It covers 163 countries, which we recognize is not all, but it's able to cover about 99.7% of the world's population. The GPI is based on 23 aggregate data sets and is categorized into 3 domains. And so, as I mentioned before, those 23 indicators are divided into 3 domains measuring peace. The first is ongoing domestic and international conflict. Second, societal safety and security. And third is the degree of militarization. So some key findings. Here's a snapshot of the GPI. As you would guess, countries in orange and red indicate lower levels of peacefulness than countries in yellow and green. So some important highlights show that within the past year, the world has gotten less peaceful. The average level country peacefulness has deteriorated by about 0.34% from last year, with 81 countries becoming more peaceful and 80 deteriorating. Improvements in peacefulness were driven by a fall in the level of weapons imports and exports, as well as the rates of homicide and incidents of terrorism. And then deteriorations in peacefulness was mainly due to deteriorations in the safety and security domain. So political instability and the rise of authoritarianism has caused a deterioration on the political terror scale. And then we've also seen that conflict has become more intense, and we're seeing larger volumes of refugees and IDPs. So some of the 2020 country level findings: Iceland continues to be the most peaceful country in the world. This is a position it's held since 2008. The countries Azerbaijan and Armenia between 2018 and 2019 had the largest improvement in peace. I'll talk about this more specifically, about this specific finding about Azerbaijan and Armenia, because I think it's quite relevant right now. Russia and Eurasia had the largest regional improvement despite some deteriorations. And then Europe remains the most peaceful region despite ongoing political instability and a small deterioration in peacefulness. And so some highlights, or rather lowlights: Afghanistan remains the world's least peaceful region. It's been deteriorating for over a decade. Benin and Nicaragua had the largest deteriorations. South America and Central America had the largest regional deteriorations, mainly due to conflict and political terror. And then the MENA region remains the world's least peaceful region. Despite ongoing conflict and instability, there have been some slight improvements in peacefulness, mostly in the safety and security domain. So here we have the 10 most countries that have been ranked in this year's Global Peace Index. Regionally, we see a large European presence as well as an Asia Pacific presence. And then looking at just general trends within these 10 countries, we see that it helps to be a democracy. It helps to be a rather small country. Not sure if it's related, but it helps to be in a country that's cold. And then here are the 10 least peaceful countries on the GPI. So as we mentioned, Afghanistan is the world's least peaceful country. And then we can see the MENA region is home to 4 of the 10 least peaceful countries in the world and remains the world's least peaceful region. So a quick look at the 5 countries with the largest increase in peacefulness. So I'll note that for the 2020 GPI, our research period ended in about March, April 2020. So this reflects data from 2019 to that period. As you may know, Azerbaijan and Armenia have broken their ceasefire and are now in conflict. And so that trend in improvement from last year reflects a time where that conflict had somewhat stabilized. The last time those 2 countries were in conflict was in 2016, and then from 2017 to 2019, both parties observed their ceasefire. And then during that ceasefire, the data that we've collected reflected lower deaths from conflict. Armenia had lower incarceration rates, and there were relative improvements in political stability. That has changed. And so the data that we're seeing from the conflict that is ongoing right now would be something that we would recognize and report on in the 2021 Global Peace Index. And so a look at the 5 countries with the largest deterioration in peace. These countries have struggled in the ongoing conflict and safety and security domains. So looking to the 2021 GPI, it wouldn't surprise us if Azerbaijan and Armenia fell on this list somehow. So now that we've seen a snapshot of peace during 2019, it's good to take a step back and look at trends in peace over the decade. So since the inception of the Global Peace Study, we've seen that global peace has generally declined. On the bottom graphic, you can see that peace has only improved 3 times since the year before. So unfortunately, the data is showing us that the world is getting considerably less peaceful now than it has about 12 years ago. And here I meant to reiterate that decline in peacefulness. So on average, peace has declined about 2.9% over the past decade or so. And then going back to those 3 domains where we aggregate our data sets, we can see that ongoing conflict is the primary driver for deteriorations in peace, but we are having improved rates in militarization. Within ongoing conflict, essentially what we're seeing is that the number of conflicts is increasing and that they're becoming more intense. Then in the safety and security domain, that level has remained relatively the same compared to the other 2 domains. We're seeing deaths from terrorism are now at their lowest in a decade, and that average global homicides rate continue to fall. But what's really keeping that safety and security domain line up is the increasing volume of refugees and IDPs. And then with militarization, this is something the world is improving in. There's a fall in the size of armed forces. As I mentioned before, lower levels of weapons imports and exports. And then despite high spending by global superpowers, a general decline in military expenditure. So the deterioration in peacefulness around the world has been considerably larger in countries that were already less peaceful to begin with. For example, Afghanistan, Syria, or the Central African Republic. This has led to an increase in what we call a peace gap between levels of peacefulness between countries in conflict and those in not. So when peaceful countries improve on their peace, it really only improves marginally, about 2.1%. But in contrast, the world's least peaceful countries are more likely to fall deeper into that pitfall, deteriorating at about 13% over the decade. So something at IIT that we like to say is that it's easier to destroy peace than it is to create peace. So I mentioned our aim at IEP is to provide a tangible, measurable way to quantify peace. So we calculate the economic cost of violence, and we do this in order to turn it around and flip it. So that way we can have an empirical basis on an understanding that peace has economic benefits. So in 2019, the global economic impact of violence was $14.5 trillion, which is equivalent to about 10.6% of the total GDP, or about $1,900 per person. We put that into perspective by saying that if the world decreased its violence by 10%, we can have $1.45 trillion directed to other sources, such as refugee or IDP support, social programs, or development aid. So from 2012 to 2017, the economic impact of violence rose by 10.2% and is now about $1.25 trillion higher than what it was in 2012. Between 2018 and 2019, there was like a slight dip in the costs by about 0.2%, but that 0.2% reflects a $29 billion decrease, and that's mostly due to lower levels of armed conflict in the MENA region. And so how do we calculate that cost? We take into account military spending, which includes nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction, direct costs associated with violence on victims, perpetrators, and public systems, such as judicial costs. And then we also take into account internal security expenditures, which includes incarceration spending and private security. So here we have 10 countries with the highest economic cost of violence. These countries have high levels of armed conflict, large numbers of internally displaced people, large militaries, or high levels of interpersonal conflict. So for example, in Syria, expenses related to conflict or violence account for 60% of the country's GDP, whereas in the 10 most peaceful countries on the GPI, the average economic cost of violence accounts for 3.9% of its GDP. So moving on to civil unrest, we also looked at trends over the decade. And in the last decade, there's been a sharp increase in civil unrest since 2011. Riots increased by 200%. Strikes increased by over 800%. And then in 2019, areas of focus for protests included economic hardship, race, police brutality, and corruption. Once again, I'm noting that the research period for the GPI ended in about March, April 2020. So this data has not yet taken into account movements such as Black Lives Matter, but it's something to definitely consider when looking to the 2021 GPI. So this slide here is meant to reiterate the increase in civil unrest over the past decade, especially in 2019, and a large percentage of these events were nonviolent. And then quickly taking a look at the data we were able to collect at the beginning of the year. So because of the COVID-19 pandemic, civil unrest declined nearly 90% from March to April. So that's when our research stopped and we were able to publish this report. And then the following month in May was when George Floyd was killed and the protests that followed after that. But we indicated in the GPI that though in the short term, the pandemic would restrict protest activity, that didn't necessarily take away from the already existing political and social tensions, and that they might be amplified due to the pandemic. And so we really focused in, because of the pandemic, how that might affect global peacefulness. And so I think it's clear that the pandemic has highlighted how interconnected fragile and complex the global socioeconomic system is. So in addition to releasing the Global Peace Index, we also released a short paper that examined the effects of the pandemic through the lens of socioeconomic development and peace building. So what have we found to be the impact of the pandemic on global peace? We've seen that most indicators in the Global Peace Index are expected to deteriorate. The one area that might improve is military expenditure, since countries are redirecting their resources to holding up the economy. Drug dealing and other types of crime have seen a temporary reduction as a result of social isolation, but we are expecting reports of domestic violence, suicide, and mental illness to increase. US and China relations are deteriorating, affecting the work of many multilateral institutions. And then the support of UN peacekeeping operations is likely to decrease because of the restrictions of travel. And then overseas development aid is also likely to decrease as those funds are being redirected to propping up internal domestic economies. But ultimately, this is putting stress on fragile countries such as Liberia, Afghanistan, and so on that rely on that ODA. And then countries with low credit ratings, such as Brazil, Pakistan, Argentina, and Venezuela, may not be able to borrow enough to sustain their economic recoveries, potentially leading to greater social unrest. So we've mapped out, and what we've seen is that countries with low levels of peacefulness and low levels of societal resilience, or as we also call positive peace, don't have the capacity to deal with and recover from large shocks such as a global pandemic. So here in the top left corner, we see in the top left corners, we see that countries with strong financial institutions and high levels of positive peace are more likely to have the best outcomes through the crisis. These are with not only strong financial institutions, but have enough structural or government strength to do, say, mass testing, taking care of unemployment, and then implementing the appropriate initiatives to quickly flatten that curve. Whereas in the upper right-hand corner, these are countries we've indicated with poor financial institutions and therefore might not be able to recover as fast economically once this pandemic has kind of died down over time. And then finally, within the Global Peace Index, another aspect of our research that we've recently explored is between the relationship of environment, peace, and resilience. In the Global Peace Index, we did the preliminary findings, which has eventually turned into a larger paper that we released in September called the Ecological Threat Register. And the ETR looks at the total of ecological threats a country is facing and compares it to the country's level of resilience using positive peace as that measure. So the ETR ranks 157 countries based on the number of ecological threats they would face. And what we found is that 141 countries are exposed to at least one ecological threat between now and 2050. The top 19 countries with the most threats are home to 2.1 billion people. 10 of those countries are within the 40 least peaceful countries on the GPI. And then we found that 6.4 billion people live in countries which are exposed to medium to high ecological threats. And then the 8 threats that we measure are food and water insecurity, population growth, droughts, floods, sea levels, cyclones, and rising temperatures. And so taking into account these high levels of threats and also the country's level of resilience, IEP identified 3 clusters that are susceptible to ecological collapse between now and 2050. And that includes the Sahel region, from Mauritania to Somalia, the Southern Africa belt, from Angola to Madagascar, and then the Middle East and Central Asian belt from Syria to Pakistan. And so here we've mapped out that frequency of ecological threats on a map. And this takes into account a country's vulnerability to those 8 threats that I mentioned earlier. But then when we add on that level of resilience or a country's positive peace levels, what starts to emerge are those 3 belts that I talked about earlier and how much more vulnerable that they become. And we recognize that when these disasters happen in relation to migration, people are more likely to be displaced internally first and then perhaps move to other countries. But we anticipate that due to the severity of these ecological threats, there are likely to be 3 major migration routes. So the first is from Central America to the US or Canada. The second could be from Africa to Europe. And then the third could be from the Middle East, Central Asia to Europe as well. And so just to reiterate the way we've calculated that previous map. So on the left-hand side, we've taken into account a country's level of resource scarcity, the frequency of natural disasters, and then compared it to their levels of socioeconomic resilience. And we've seen that because 43 countries are susceptible to collapse, that could lead to 1.2 billion at the risk of displacement by 2050. And so I know that's a rather alarming note to end on, but that essentially wraps up the findings from the 2020 GPI. I'd love to take the next 20 minutes or so to answer questions or engage in discussion.
So that's excellent. Thank you very much, Jessica. So what I was thinking is, let's see if we can really just have people ask their own questions. So I've got, I can see everybody's microphone. So if you unmute your microphone, which you can do yourself, then I'm going to say, you have a question. So if anybody wants to unmute their microphone, go ahead. And then I will say, okay, ask your question. And try to keep our questions short so that we can get as many in as possible. So does anybody have a question? Unmute my microphone. Oh, come on.
I'll ask a first question if I may.
Okay.
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Jillian. Yeah. Jillian, is it Jillian? Yeah.
It's Susan.
It's Susan. Oh, Susan. Okay.
That's
Jillian's got
okay.
hers open too. We'll go to Jillian after Susan. Go, Susan.
Okay. I just wanted to ask a question for clarification, if I may. The point that you were making about, let's check my notes here. Yeah, you were talking about some of the reasons behind decreases in violence in regions that had less peace. And you mentioned, I just want to be sure I got this right. Did you mention a decline in military expenditure? I guess I found that surprising. And I just wanted to know if I understood that correctly.
So we recognize a decline in military expenditure as a reason for improvements in peace. I think you might be referring to when I broke down the 3 domains that we observe our data in. I can go back to that slide, but the downward trend in militarization, even we put it in green to indicate that the downward trend is actually good, that it leads to improved levels of peacefulness.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Jillian, did you still have a question?
Yes. I don't know, maybe I missed it, Jessica, but did you mention the United States? Like, how do we fit in there? And you listed all these countries, but I thought, how are we doing?
I'll open it up to the table. If anyone hadn't taken a peek at the GPI, where do you think the United States ranks out of 163 countries? You can put it in the chat.
Yeah, tell us in the chat, where do you think? Someone said 80, 72, 100, 121, 120.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're 121. And so
out of how many countries? Out of how many countries again, Jessica?
Out of 163. So we're not doing that hot. And so really what drives that? We would associate our involvement with the low GPI scores with we do really poorly in the militarization domain. because of our spread of troops all over the world, because of our military expenditure. And then, so even though we aren't necessarily in ongoing reported conflict, it's that militarization and then societal safety and security, taking into account possible effects of political terror or group grievances. So it's those two domains, militarization and societal safety and security, that really drive that ranking down.
Thanks, Jillian. Any other questions? Go ahead, Marley. Marley, yeah, let me get you open. You can undo your mic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, what's your definition of resilience?
So we use the definition of resilience. One of the other reports that we produce is the Positive Peace Index, and that looks at, not only the absence of conflict, but attitudes, institutions, and structures that exist that create and sustain peaceful societies. So we use positive peace and resilience kind of interchangeably.
How do you measure the attitude? How do you measure those things? The attitude and the belief systems and all those things.
Yeah, so this is a quick introduction into something else that we produce, which is called the 8 Pillars of Positive Peace. And that's kind of how we break up and aggregate the data. So we look at data sets that are good indicators of those 8 pillars. Some of the examples would be a well-functioning government, low levels of corruption, high equitable distribution of resources, high levels of human capital, free flow of information, exception to the rights of others.
Perfect.
And
Thank
I
you.
think that might be 7 or the 8 of them.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been wondering about that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I got a question from Hari. Jessica, do civil protests in a country negatively affect the peace index?
When we take into account civil unrest, we look at them in both the ongoing conflict and societal safety and security domain, depending on their intensity. I would say it negatively affects peace, because even though a protest or a movement might not be violent, it still reflects a lack of trust within a government and group grievances, which ultimately is a reflection of low levels of peacefulness.
Other questions? I see some stuff in the chat box. I'm necessarily going to read it unless people would rather me read it. I'd rather people put their own comments out there. So anybody else want to open their mic and ask something? This seems to be going fine. Someone, Maria?
Yeah, what about gender and some of the issues you mentioned about violence? In the context of gender, like what was the most significant finding in that area?
I don't have the data off the top of, or the research off the top of my head, but I will note that in our other reports, such as the Positive Peace Index and the Global Terrorism Index, we do take into account a gender lens, how terrorism disproportionately affects women and children, and then also looking at the acceptance of the rights of others pillar in the Positive Peace Index. We do take into account a gender lens.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else? Just go ahead and chime in.
Jessica, this is such an interesting topic. So what advice would you give someone that is interested in working in this field, like maybe working for the organization that you're employed with?
Good question.
That is a good question. So I can quickly talk about how I got involved in IEP.
Yeah, please.
I think this will quickly reveal my age, but I was an intern with IEP right after I finished college. So I was an intern with them for about 6 months in Sydney, Australia, but I went to college in New York. And so eventually the opportunity opened it up where I can join the institution. I majored in economics and peace studies, which was quite fitting. But I would say, you don't need to have an economics degree to work in think tanks like this. Although we are very research heavy, we also kind of have some outward thinking into how we can develop our partnerships, develop our research. So I would say you could have overarching interests in not only research, but education, peace building, doing on the ground work as well.
Lena, you have your microphone open. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jessica, who are the predominant organizations that utilize the material you produce?
So we share our research within a lot of different institutions. I'll give 2 examples. So we recently released the Ecological Threat Register. We released it in partnership with UN 75. And one of the initiatives that UN 75 doing is kind of a global survey on how people think the progress of the UN has been.
Could you define what UN 75 is? That's the 75th anniversary of the UN. I know that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And so one of the major projects that they did was a survey of, I think, over 1 million people to kind of gauge how they think the UN has progressed over its 75 years. And one of the ways what we've done is we've used the Ecological Threat Register to inform people's beliefs on how the climate crisis has been handled. And then another example I mentioned quite earlier is that the Ecological Threat Register has been picked up in US high schools. So the Ecological Threat Register has been implemented in a program where students who take AP Environmental Science can use the Ecological Threat Register to either inform their essays or inform like group projects.
Excellent. Annette, you look like you have a question.
Yes, I do. I was interested in where the United States lies in the scheme of things on the resilience and what were the most impactful and least impactful areas in there.
Yeah. So comparing the Global Peace Index and the Positive Peace Index, the US actually ranks higher in the Positive Peace Index. One of the reasons is that we have a really strong business environment. So that kind of pushes us up, but we still take into account kind of political tensions, incarceration rates, levels of inequality. So I would say that it's kind of 2 sides. When looking at the data, one thing that really pushes us up is the strength of our government and business institutions, but then underlying that are those larger systemic problems.
Okay, so we really need to work with inside of our own country, inside of our own communities on talking peacefully together about difficult subjects, correct?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, the GPI is a global index, so the data is only as good as the data we're able to capture for all 163 countries. Right. So really getting down to kind of the root issues within the US, it's probable that you'd have to look at its own data sets because the issues that are going on in the US are not necessarily those that are happening in the other 162 countries in the GPI.
Thanks, Annette. Anybody else? Bobby, I thought you had a question, Bobby?
Yeah. Yes. So $14.5 trillion seems like a lot of money. And it makes you wonder, like, who doesn't want peace if there's this gigantic benefit? So in your research, have you ever found or any people, causes, or organizations that are benefiting from not having peace?
Do you mind elaborating a little bit on your question, if I understand correctly, like in what ways financial systems are kind of turning it around and reusing that deficit?
Let me add on to Bobby, and not to take away from him, but one of the issues has always been is that there is a war apparatus, right? So if I go to war, military contractors are cha-ching, right? They're making money, building armaments and all the things related to war. So is there a disincentive to create peace in certain constituencies? Maybe that's another way of looking at it. Is that right, Bobby? Are you thinking that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a very difficult question. I mean, I think the views of IEP, we haven't necessarily gone that step further in proving that, there's this deficit, this peace deficit. If we just take 10%, here's where it can go. I think one of the ways we've tried to figure that out is that, you know, you look at the things that go into the economic cost of violence. So we have incarceration spending, judicial fees, militarization. Who are those people impacting? So, I mean, it's not as simple, but you can see it by flipping it around. So that the direct cost of violence that go to refugees, if we decrease that, can they go back? Can that money go back to them?
Okay.
Maybe like a reparations model. This is just me speaking out of my own mind, but you know, that can be a lens that can take a look.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Logan.
Hi. So through your research, did you find any data points or narratives that spoke to the impact of international student exchange towards positive peace?
That's a good question. Maybe. I only say this because one of the indicators that we look at in our positive peace index, one of our pillars is good relations with neighbors. And we also take a look at tourism rates. Not to say that tourism is a direct relation with peace, but you know, you kind of have to be like a strong, or you know, doing well as a socioeconomic society to be able to house tourists, you know, have that industry flourish. So that's one of the ways we look at it. I think a good, maybe student exchange rates are involved in that because we look at those, you know, visitation, that visitation data.
One of the things I would add to that, Logan, it's really a good point. And I mean, I know Logan well, and he did a study abroad recently in Spain. And, you know, those of us who do this kind of work, we're big proponents of study abroad. We either done it ourselves or we encourage our students to do it. And every study abroad program I work with, and I work with the Fulbright program, that's kind of the premise, is that by going abroad, you're increasing peace in understanding by going abroad and learning about what they're doing. Having said that, I'm going to put something out there that you might think about that I get from my son, I must tell you, who was in the Peace Corps, who would say that there is also a colonialization that goes on with Americans going overseas. And there is a growing group of returned Peace Corps volunteers who are not really studying abroad, but going abroad to work, who might argue that what they really are doing is a bit of colonialization at the expense of the country they're visiting. So there are a couple ways of looking at that. I don't know, Logan, I don't want to speak for you if you want to add something to that, but yeah, something to think about.
No, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, yeah. And we can do crosstalk also, is that, you know, we're asking questions, but Lena, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask if GPI has ever thought about doing a score or a rating or stars, you know, like you're the best country, you got the most peace, so you get 5 stars. Competition sometimes is a motivator.
You're talking about a Michelin star rating, like for restaurants?
I mean, what I will say is this: we rank countries up against one another. As an institution, we can't say, you know, Iceland is the perfect country because they are the most peaceful. So I think the idea of ranking is comparing each country, not necessarily saying which country is in a perfect state of peace or in a terrible state of peace. Ranking, I think, gives the best idea.
Yeah. Thank you, Lena. Any other questions? Just open your mic and talk amongst ourselves too. We can do that. Paul, please.
Hey, everyone.
Good to see you. Good to see you, Paul.
Good to see you too, David, and everybody else. I know that this information is great, and I have 2 students here with us today, and I don't think they've gotten to this module yet, but it's in the last module I have for the IEP and everything. But I know there's been some Pew Research polls taken about what people in other countries consider the most dangerous country in the world. And I think the last one I saw was maybe from 2018. And sadly, the United States often shows up as the most dangerous, you know, when compared to Russia, China, things like that. So I just wonder if there's any talk at the IEP about that type of research as well.
Yeah,
Well, can you tell us what class you're teaching?
Oh, sure. It's an Introduction to Peace Studies course, Valencia College down in Orlando, Florida.
Thanks, Carol and Paul. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I think we wouldn't necessarily equate danger with conflict, but we do take into account levels of conflict. And then we also take into account the intensity of conflict. And then we also have that indicator, political terror scale. So perhaps, you know, those 3 or 4 different types of ongoing conflict could indicate danger per se. I think Pew would have a good job at defining danger. But if you wanted to look at danger within the GPI, you could take a look at those indicators.
Other questions? Anybody else want to ask? I think, you know, one of the things that I'm curious about, and Paul, I think you raised it also, is that one of the things about peace that I think has been the conundrum over time has been the lack of the hard science behind it. You know, we're in this kind of period where, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, but maybe we're not all the time, where facts and data and the scientific process, the evaluative process of understanding quantifiably how something works becomes important. And peace was always this thing of, well, it feels peaceful to me, it looks peaceful to me, I guess it's peaceful. And what the GPI does and what the Institute of Economics and Peace does is kind of put it out there in a way that it feels like it's met this vetting process. Are any of you, I mean, Paul, you're saying you use it with your students or talk about it. Anybody else is looking at the Global Peace Index or bringing it into their classrooms, or see how they could bring it into their classrooms in a sense? And we just got a few more minutes because we're going to take a break before 1:15. But if anybody wants to add anything, Samuel, please.
Yeah, I think when I've discussed this in sociology classes, it's how to contextualize, for example, the United States ranking at 121, but the countries around it look very different. Whereas the North American region is second to Europe in terms of average score on the and towards the peaceful side. So, you know, a lot of students, when I've talked about it, they kind of recoiled to say, wait, how could the United States be so low and yet North America? And then that gives us a good way to discuss not just the measures themselves, but what does peace look like in all its dimensions? We need to challenge ourselves. Like you said, it feels peaceful for so many millions of people in this country who never interact with those other millions where there's a lot of conflict and violence surrounding them. And so in that sense, I like that tension between where the United States ranks and how we can discuss internally, given these objective measures. This is not perception of violence, which is problematic, right? The people in this country have thought that violence is at its high point when it's been at its lowest point since, in some ways, since the 20s and 30s, and in other ways since the 50s. So I really enjoy this.
You know, one of the things, thank you, Simi, one of the things you got me to think about is it's my peace at someone else's expense. So if I live out in the suburbs and it's nice and peaceful where I am, there's no violence where I am. So it's kind of peaceful here, but my peace may be at the expense of violence against someone else. So this is looking at peace, not so much the overt notion, but kind of the more structural notions of violence also, which, you know, I don't know if the GPI is looking at that, but it's kind of this deeper notion when, especially in this era, we're looking at social justice, right? My safety is wonderful, but it's at the expense of somebody else's insecurity. I don't know if anybody's looking at it that way. Go ahead, open your mic if you want to add. Fran.
I actually, in some of my module, actually, Jessica, thank you so much for this great presentation. So I do bring the economic index for students to look at, and they are kind of shocked about like where we are on that list. So it kind of opens up, like Samuel said, you know, kind of opens up for a great conversation there, that what peace is and what it is not, and also bringing your point, David, about is it particularly it becomes very clear about when we cross ecosystems and sustainability, and seeing that actually we export all of our things that, that it would be damaging to environment, and then we send it somewhere else. So it looks like in California that I live, that we are doing a really good job with environmental issues, but really somebody else is paying that cost. So the cost of my food is really the cheapness of the food here is the cost somewhere else. So yeah, I mean, like we do talk about all of that, yeah, absolutely, in every aspect of peace that you're looking at, from the ecosystem to criminal justice system. Of course, people, they push drugs and everything else into communities of color or low-income communities, whereas actually they are the users and they never go to jail or anything like that for the possession of that. But sure, they will go to jail for selling it. So yeah, it's a legit way of looking at it, that yes, it looks peaceful over here, but is there a cost somewhere else? And students are supposed to, in my classes, supposed to actually identify who pays for their food, who pays for their luxury, who pays for their nice level of living, somewhere else.
Whose backs are we standing on? Now we're going to take a break now, but before I go to Tulin has a question and Carolyn, but I want to tell people that if they need to check out for 15 minutes, do what they need to be to come back in 1:15, go ahead. No one's going to be offended, but then I'll keep taking questions while we have some more questions. Tulin and then Carolyn. Tulin, you want to add something?
I actually have comments. And
yeah.
The first comment, that this is in response to you, David, when you talked about the Peace Corps and that there might be a form of colonization. While having lived abroad, grown up abroad actually, and met Peace Corps people, that's not my impression of Peace Corps people, because usually they live under very modest conditions. So I have never felt colonized. However, I've lived abroad also as an expat community. So the expat communities, I lived in Taiwan, for example, for a couple of years. And yes, being part of the expat community does have a sense of neocolonization. Okay, so that's one. And the second one, the comment that you made again, David, that, my peace might be at the expense of someone else. So I was surprised in the presentation that with positive peace, that the United States is pretty resilient. On the other hand, there is racial strife, and we've seen it, and there is poverty in the United States. So how is it in positive peace? How is it all that resilient? I find that a bit confusing.
Yeah, Jessica, maybe you could respond to, because I know you're looking at many factors. It used to be like 11 or 12 factors that are kind of brought together. So something may offset something else. Is that what it is? Or
yeah, essentially, yeah. I mean, I also recognize the inequalities, the systemic inequalities that happen in the United States. But as I said before, it's some of those institutions that are really strong in the United States that build our level of resilience. For example, in the Ecological Threat Register, one of the outside projects that we've been looking at is when these ecological disasters happen. So for example, wildfires and floods in the United States. Yes, they're devastating, but the institutions, the humanitarian aid, the government is relatively stronger than other countries who would experience the same intensity of a wildfire, flood, cyclones. So that's where we recognize the resilience, the ability to recover after shocks like that. So environmental shocks, financial shocks, things like that.
Thank you. We can go a few more minutes. Anybody else have a question for Jessica, or a little bit of cross-talking is good too. People are raising things that they want to share. Carolyn.
Jessica, I'm wondering whether you study a correlation, since the United States leadership probably has an outsized influence over some of these, at least attitudes. I won't go as far to say actions, but are you seeing a correlation between American leadership, say, you know, Jimmy Carter or even a Reagan versus a, you know, Donald Trump administration? Is that something you track or notice the influence of, or is that too indirect?
So we started as an institution, I think in 2006. So when we started the Positive Peace Index, we were able to track year by year, kind of those relations between positive peace and a political administration. So we'll be able to see that year by year, but going back, you know, decades, I don't think that's something we've taken to a look at yet. We did produce the United States Peace Index in 2012. I can't remember exactly what the indicators for that were, but perhaps that data might be in there.
It's time to do that again, maybe.
Yes, you're not the first person who was asked, and we're working on it.
Yeah, I mean, but the problem with this year, though, is that this year is an outlier. You know, one of the things to think about when you're doing any kind of quantitative research or even qualitative research is that there's the kind of the large span of what goes on over many years, and then you've got this outlier year that is being driven by COVID, and that you can't generalize this year to other years. You know what I'm saying? People understand that a little bit. And that's one of the challenges. You know, we look at different economic statistics and we think, wow, it's so bad now, but you know, it's because of this one situation we got going on. So yeah, it's a challenge. Any more questions? And I'll let Jessica go, and then we can take a break. We have 5 minutes before we start next group. But any final questions for Jessica or any more comments? Richard.
Hey, David, good to see you. Thank you for hosting this again. Yeah, I had a quick question that has to do with access to some of these data points. A colleague and I do a geography unit using ArcGIS, which is this amazing technology that's way over my head. But we import data sets that then are represented graphically on maps and other sorts of things. And I wonder if the IEP makes some of those data sets available in their raw form so that they can be incorporated in applications like ArcGIS.
We don't use geographical data points. Are you referring to like satellite data or maybe
No, I'm sorry. I didn't explain it very well. Just the data sets about like the economic indicators or those sorts of things that you've collected, because those can be incorporated if they're presented in a particular way, you know, CSV and those sorts of things, whether they can be included in our projects.
Yeah, so the way we collect our data through those 23 indicators, we take indexes from other think tanks and use that as indicators. We use like data from the Economist Intelligence Unit. We collect data from the World Bank. We collect that, run it through the regression, and then rank those countries from one another.
So you're using publicly available data for the most part that we would have access to.
Yeah,
possibly.
some of them are publicly available. Some we contact the institution for the data.
Okay, all right, cool.
So,
sorry, then the other part was just whether or not we would perhaps have access to your wonderful slide deck.
Yes, I'd be happy to send it.
It was wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jessica, if you can send that to me and also put your contact information in the chat box, if you can, if anybody wants to email you. But good question, Rich. Yeah, I want to make everything readily available to everyone.
And you had asked about the IEP website, I think. I found it very easily navigable, and I'm not particularly technically savvy. And it was wonderful to be able to download all of those different reports, the brief version, the longer versions for free. So thank you very much.
That's our aim, to make our research free.
Round of applause for Jessica. Thank you. Let's take, I want to keep us on time. So we've got about 3 minutes before we bring in Ninette and Heather. So Jessica, thank you. Give us your contact information in the chat box. And then actually Jessica's got everybody's email and now you have her email. So believe me, I don't need to facilitate your conversation with them. With IEP, you do it on your own because they're looking forward. I had a conversation with the person that Jessica works for, Michael, right? and he was saying how important it is that they want to work more with community colleges and take their work into community colleges more. So if you feel like that's something you want to do, email Jessica. She'll get it out there, and then you'll have that connection right away to what they're doing. So thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn my screen off just for about 2 minutes, and we'll come back. And I'm trying to think what time it is. It looks like it's about 2 minutes until we go, because I'm going to grab another cup of coffee and turn my mic and screen on. Then I'll be back, and then I'll introduce Ninette and Heather. And the next round will really be very much of a conversation. I'm hoping in particular students participate in that, because we're going to talk about careers from 2 young professional women who started in community college. And I think that is probably very important for us to all think a little bit about. So I'll see you all in about 2 minutes. Hello, everyone. So I hope everyone grabbed the coffee, or whatever they needed to grab in this break. Everyone's going to come back. The idea of making this just 2 hours a day is hopefully there's a benefit in not taxing us too much, and allowing us to come back with a little bit more energy. I know there is something called Zoom fatigue. I think if you're a social scientist, you're just having a field day right now studying different ways of communicating and how it's affecting people. But and I don't know, I used to think, well, I'm doing the same thing in Zoom that I would do normally in front of students, but I'm tired, or why is that? And people are saying it's like we have to pay attention in a different way. It's the eyesight thing. It's all of that, but it does make us tireder. So that's why we're just kind of doing this in 2-hour bits in that respect. So let me give another minute, and then I want to introduce Ninette and Heather to you both. And then I've actually given both of them a few questions to think about. We'll probably start with that. I'm going to go find my questions. Let me unmute you. Heather, you can unmute yourself, and Ninette, why don't you both unmute yourselves? You should be able to do that. Now, I'm actually going to make you, well, I don't really need, do either one of you want to share anything? Because then I would make you co-host if you want to share something. We can just chat. That was the idea. Okay. All right, great. So Heather is in Golden, Colorado right now. Is that right, Heather?
Yeah.
And Ninette's in Yarmouth, Maine. So once again, something you could never have done in a pre-COVID Zoom world is talk to people from around the country. Heather is generally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, though. So I think there's at least one other person in this call who's from Oklahoma. I forget who. Yeah, there's another Oklahoman here. So so that's nice also. So we have people all around the country. So so why don't I go ahead? It looks like I've got 34. It looks like everybody's checking in, so I can kind of go slowly, talk a little bit about careers, and then introduce the two of them, and then really have a nice conversation with them. And I've got some questions I want to ask them, and I really do want to have a conversation here. So I'm asking questions. Other people can ask questions also. So a lot of you know that my emphasis, which is still deeply involved in community colleges, has recently changed in the last couple of years, in that I focus a lot more about careers and looking at how young people in particular can promote a career for themselves in peace building, social justice, humanitarian work. I think too often we kind of assume that a career will happen. And as educators, regardless of where we are, but particularly in a community college, we get students all excited about something. And then we figure, well, they'll figure out what to do once they walk across the stage, and they'll do something with it. When in fact, that's not the case all the time. It is a bit of a struggle. So spending time as educators and with our students in the room with us today, thinking really hard about what career paths might look like and how people go about their work is really important. So through the Forage Center, which I'm the president of, and through my education work, I have really met some incredible people, incredible young professionals, men and women who are just doing fantastic work. That just to talk about them, I blush. I'm so excited when I talk to them here about what they're doing. And two of them are with us today. So I want to introduce them both to you. And then really, I want to go through and have them talk about their experiences and have them questions. So Heather Payne, Heather was a student of mine at George Mason University in the now called the Carter School, used to be the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, where she got her master's degree. Did you graduate from Tulsa Community College or just took courses? I couldn't remember. Heather.
I graduated.
She graduated from Tulsa Community College, went on to the University of Central Oklahoma, and then came to George Mason to get her master's. For the last 2 years, she's been working mostly in South Sudan for Nonviolent Peace Force, which I know she'll talk about. She's also worked in Lebanon for some NGOs, but in Nonviolent Peace Force, she was focusing on civilian protection. So she's going to talk about what civilian protection is and the work involved in that. She's now in Golden, Colorado. She returned back to the US, is working there. And like I said, she participated in the Forage Center's, our humanitarian 4-day program. She did that when she was at George Mason University, and she still helps the Forage Center. Ninette Irabaruta is, once again, another great peace builder. I got to know Ninette because she came to a Forage Center program. I think, were you still a student at Brandeis at the time, or was it after being at Brandeis?
It was after, right after.
After Brandeis. I learned about this. I learned about Ninette. I got to tell you, she was the commencement speaker at the community college, Southern Maine Community College. She was a commencement speaker, right? So she was a student there, and she's originally from Burundi, and she might tell us a little bit about that story if she wishes. But so here she's this commencement speaker. I just thought this was fabulous, talking about her experiences. So she came to US, went to the Southern Maine Community College, then went on to St. Joseph's University, and then went to Brandeis, where she was in the Heller School and received a degree. Was it in international development? What was the degree at the Heller School?
It was a master's in sustainable international development.
Sustainable international development. So And I keep working with Ninette, and I've been taxing both Ninette and Heather to do all kinds of talks for me because they're just two fabulous women that can speak to great experiences. Ninette also came to the Forage Center, and like I said, she's originally from Burundi. She now works, she's a global associate manager at Nourish, and she does some consulting for the Maine Community Foundation. So you can talk about that too, Ninette, that would be great. And she lives in Yarmouth, Maine. So I am just going to ask them, opening it up, and if you can, everybody keep their microphones off until, except for Ninette, but then, you know, as you feel like you've got a question to put in, just kind of open it up and we'll just go from there. So I want you both to tell us, and either one of you can start, what you're doing now. I mean, what's the work that you're doing now? Tell us a little bit about that, and then tell how that relates to your peace building interests, and then we'll kind of go on to other things. I do want you to talk about community college too, but tell us about what you're doing now. Either one of you can start. Heather, why don't you start?
Sure. So hello, everyone. Thanks for that nice introduction, David, and nice to see you again, Ninette. And thanks everyone for being here. So right now, as David said, I'm in Golden, Colorado. I recently moved here actually a week ago yesterday. Since I got back to the US, which was this May, I've just been a little bit all over the place, but now I'm in Colorado because I recently started a job at a juvenile detention center, and I'm a youth service specialist there. So a mixture of things. I mentor the youth and also responsible for some safety and security, which definitely relates to peace building. And then also they have a restorative community justice program there that I'm sort of getting involved with as I'm starting. I think they want to, I mean, I've only been there, I started this week, but I think that they want to sort of improve their restorative justice program a little bit. So I'm gonna try to start that. But yeah, restorative justice and working with at-risk youth, and also, of course, safety and security. But mostly working with at-risk youth is something that has been very consistent in my career. So even whenever I was working in South Sudan, I worked with at-risk youth, and in Lebanon, that's what I did as well. So, yeah, I'm just continuing on that path.
Ninette, tell us about what you're doing.
Hello, everybody. What am I doing? I work for Nourish to the end degree, and it's the whole thing, it's the Nourishment Economics Coalition, and it's more on the side of the environment and economy and the soil that we grow our food in. We are a private company, but with a social mission, and we work with social entrepreneurs from all over the world. And that is connected to the peace building that I'm passionate about in this way. Let's just think a quick example. We are all humans and we need food to eat in order to survive. And when you think about, for example, a rural community, let me say in Ecuador, that have indigenous people who are trying to survive, to grow food and to fight for the climate change, but that are not given, that chance to protect what they have had for all these centuries. So most of the time, my friends will ask me, but that's not peace building. You should be in Burundi helping Hutus and Tutsis to come together. But the way I see it is that everywhere we are, there are conflicts, no matter how you look at it. And it's up to us to figure out how that conflict, how we can resolve that conflict that are happening around us. And food and the environment, what's to come. We just saw it in California and in Colorado, people
getting moved from their homes because, the fires. So I feel like, yes, it's not a conflict like what I have seen growing up, the genocide and civil war, but at the same time, the side of the conflict and being hungry, not having enough food to feed our populations, that it's really going to be another conflict that we're going to have to, to be out. Yes.
It reminds me of Gandhi's, Mahatma Gandhi once said the worst form of violence is poverty, right? And so we have to think about poverty as something that leads to other forms of violence also. So I would definitely agree with you. So I want both of you to kind of go back to community college if we can, and tell me a little bit about how, excuse me, I was going to sneeze, how your experiences in community college, because we are a community college group, and both of you know this seminar. I must tell you both also that Ninette came and spoke at the seminar about 2 years ago, and Heather used to help out with the seminar when it was in Northern Virginia Community College. So you know the faculty that are here, you know the students that are here. Tell me about what your community college experiences did for you and kind of starting you off, and either one of you can start.
For me, at Southern Maine Community College, I saw something I haven't seen before. Being a new Mainer, I thought, we know it's maybe over 90% white, but at the community college, I found many nationalities, people from Africa, people from Middle East, people from South America. It was this diverse community college. And being there, I was doing political science and having the chance to speak to people, for example, who were Americans, but who have fought in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, who were on the ground, being there and having that conversation with them. And also, another thing I look back at that community that really gave me was the confidence, being a new person in a new place. It was a little difficult for me, but I felt it was welcoming. It was in a welcoming school. I knew everybody from the president of the school to the man who was cleaning the schools after at night. I got to network, and everybody really opened their arms and wanted to talk to me. So I found refuge at that school than when I wasn't at school. So, and I really feel like the time I was there gave me the courage and confidence to go and do what I did after being there.
Thanks, Ninette. Heather, what do you remember about Tulsa Community College?
I'm really proud of my community college education start. So as being a first generation bachelor's and also first generation master's, I think that, well, first in high school, I didn't really like school in general. So I didn't have a lot of plans to continue my education. And I think that starting at Tulsa Community College really helped me get started in education, because I was like, I think if I would have started directly at University of Central Oklahoma, for example, I don't think I would have completed the 4 years. I think that I probably would have felt overwhelmed. So starting at Tulsa Community College was like a way for me to ease into my college education, get started, and the professors there were like extremely nice, and like the classes were a bit more easygoing. It didn't seem stressful. It wasn't it wasn't like the university environment. So I really appreciated that, and I loved it. Like the first week I went, I was like, oh my gosh, I actually love school now. And so I was like, oh, I can't, I'm gonna get my bachelor's and then maybe my master's, and then I'm just thinking in this way. So starting at TCC really helped me love school again. So yeah.
Both of you are.
Can I add?
Yes, go please, Ninette. Yes.
Yes. What Heather just mentioned about our professors, really, that was also one thing that today I can say I'm so proud to have gone to a community college at the time than just going straight to a full area university or college. Because, you know, when you are somewhere where you have to learn the language in order to go to school, not because you don't understand whatever they are teaching, but because you don't understand the language they are teaching it. So having that chance to sit down with professors, you know, to give their time out of their way to help you make it, that really was something I didn't see at St. Joe's or Brandeis, you know, because professors are running, yes, they give you the time, but they are running, you know, all over the place, and they have so many students. But at community college, I felt like I had so much time with my professors than at the colleges I went to.
That's really important. You know, one of the things that strikes me about both of you is that you both have an element of risk taking in your personality. Ninette coming to the United States, regardless of the circumstances, it's still a risk. And Heather going to South Sudan, and I want Heather to talk a little bit about her work, and Ninette to talk a little bit about your work also, what you were doing at the Heller School. But do you see you both as risk-taking people, and how has your education influenced that? You know, Heather, to pick up and go to South Sudan. Heather and I have talked about this several times. Is it's like, okay, mom and dad, I'm off to South Sudan. What do you think about that? Kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. I don't know if I would say I'm a risk taker, but I guess for other, you know, if you consider yourself to not be a risk taker and you look and you see someone like me, then maybe I guess that would be it. I do like adventures. So, and I, you know, whenever I graduated with my master's, I really wanted international work experience. So actually I did take a risk by just leaving the country. Like I just left directly with no contacts or not really knowing what I was going to do, but I left to Lebanon and I made contacts whenever I got there. You know, one thing led to the next. I was volunteering, and then, you know, had a small stipend and had a had my living expenses provided to me. And so I got experience like that, and that led me to India, and I worked there for a few months, and then I got the job in South Sudan, and I worked there for a total of 2 years. And so yeah, one thing led to the next.
Ninette, how about you in risk taking? Are you a risk taker?
I always say yes. When I go back and look at the trajectory of what I have done or where I am, I really feel like I won't be here today speaking to all of you if I didn't take those risks. Yes, it was scary at times, but you know, I felt like that was what I needed to do. And another thing that really made me keep taking risks, even today, I feel like it's because I had the responsibilities for my siblings. And not having parents and just us, I felt like, you know, even those moments where I felt like, you know, I'm done with this earth. You know, I just need to go. You know, I felt like they were the ones, you know, that voice behind of my mind telling me you have to do this, not just because of you, but because of those you love. So that's how, you know, I went on from, you know, struggling in Burundi to taking this risk to come to a country at a young age without knowing anyone. And also getting here, not burying myself somewhere, taking that risk again of going out to the world, saying, hey, I'm here, you know, I'm a new Maine, I'm a new American, help me to get somewhere, you know.
I don't, to provide, I'm just going to provide a little bit of context, is that Burundi went through a civil war, and Ninette comes from that experience of the civil war. We often think about Rwanda, but we don't know that preceding the Rwanda civil war, there was one in Burundi that was just as bad. It's just that we don't hear about it. And it was between Hutus and Tutsis also, and that she comes out of that experience before she came to the United States and lost much of her family. So it's peace coming out of tragedy, kind of thing, for her. So I want to open it up. I'm going to stop talking, and I want other people to ask questions. So just undo your mic, and then you'll rise to the top of my list, and I'll say go. And I want faculty to ask questions, but I also want students to ask questions. So ask Ninette and Heather questions like, what advice would you give, right? And how did you do it? And where do I go? So I want to see some student questions here. I'm gonna call on people if I don't get any questions, because I got some students I can pick on in here, right? Logan, I'm searching you out.
I can ask a question.
Yes, under your microphone. You are?
Sarah Bowman.
Oh, Sarah, there you are. The microphone didn't open. Oh, you raised your hand. Wonderful. Good. Okay.
You mentioned, I think Ninette mentioned that the community college was so welcoming, and that the four-year universities and graduate level programs weren't in that same way. I was wondering what advice you would give to students who are making that transition, because it could be quite a shock, I think.
I would say really to go out of your comfort zone and just reach out to people and ask questions, because at the end of the day, this is about you and where you want to go. And I feel like there's always someone who wants to listen. But at the same time, there's someone also who may not want to be bothered. But I will say that always look around, learn about your faculty members, know who they are, their backgrounds, try to look at, who they are at the college, community college, or where you are transferring. For me, the success really came because I felt like being shy wasn't going to help me in any way at the level where I was. So, and I knew I wanted to succeed no matter how difficult it was. So when I was at the community college, why I mentioned that I knew everybody from the president to the person no one really talked to as a student, it's because I wanted to understand not only the culture of the community college, but the people who, because I felt like we are people before everything else. So going out there, networking with the people at the university, at the community college. And also I remember when I was transferring to St. Joseph's College, I didn't just go straight to St. Joseph's College or other colleges I was applying to. I find professors at the college and also people who were working in the administration and asked, so someone like me transferring to this college, do you think it's a good idea? What have you seen? Mm-hmm. And I will be honest with you. Sometimes I was told, oh, you cannot transfer to Borden College, for example. Borden College, it's this private college, really well advanced and all of that. But I was like, why not? Why I can't go to Borden College, And there were many conversations like that, because first we look at, where you come from, how long you've been here, which school you are at. Oh, you are at a community college. You can go to, Harvard from a community college. But we know stories of people who have done it. So I feel like there are gonna be obstacles, of course, because we assume that can be done. But at the same time, I will say that push, go further, you know, don't take a no just because somebody told you no or they think you can. Just go and find out yourself and do it. Yes.
Heather, did you want to add or take another question?
I'll just add a little bit. I mean, in general, for me, you know, getting my associate's degree at a community college, I actually went for more than 2 years. I had to take classes that didn't count for credit. This way I can get caught up in my education. But I mean, just in general, it prepared me to go to a university. I think that I spent like 3 years, maybe 3.5 years at CCC. And it really prepared me. And by the time I left, I was like, okay, I'm ready to do this. Like, I'm ready to finalize my 4-year, well, it was longer than 4 years, but my bachelor's degree. So I think just, you know, getting my associates and having that experience was really important for me. So in general, I think the whole experience prepared me for that.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you for those questions, Sarah. Any other questions? You can raise your hand or just open your mic. And there are some questions also in the chat box. If you have a question, why don't you just ask it? Easier than me trying to speak for you. If anybody's got any other questions, please.
I have a quick question.
Yeah,
David.
Rich, go ahead.
I wonder if Ninette and Heather could speak to whether or not, when they were going through at the community college level, peace studies, global studies programs existed. My sense is that they're a relatively new sort of product, if you will, but I wonder if their internal desires and inclinations towards peace building and peace studies had been nurtured or sparked by existing programs or particular professors.
I would say yes for me. So I was taking political science at the time, and I was already interested in the world and the peace building and humanitarian work, the UN work. So I already had that. And then when I got to Southern Community College in Maine, there was a particular professor who really always made us come up or read something that was happening outside of the US every single day. And that really pushed the conversation, especially I remember a particular one when at the time we were studying about what has happened in Libya. And then I remember sitting in class because, you know, most of the time we do read things from sites that are not the same as what the outside the US are receiving. So being at the community college at the time, I got really upset because I felt like everything I knew coming here before I came here was taken away by what the student in my classroom, the information the student in my classroom had. But I was grateful for that professor because she really opened the floor, you know, to understand both sides, and then also knowing that not everything we receive as information, you know, is the same as somewhere else. Because I followed what happened in Libya when I was back home, and I had you know, friends, and I was reading, and I had people in my family who worked at the international level. So yes, the peace building was nourished when I was at the community college, because it was a political science program, which was, I guess, helpful at at that point, because we had to talk about these things that make us uncomfortable, and have to come up with, a really an understanding that everybody's comfortable with, even though it wasn't an easy way. But yes.
Heather?
Yeah, whenever I was going to TCC, I didn't even know there was a such thing as a peace building and conflict resolution degree. So I didn't realize that until, I graduated from my bachelor's and then I went on to my master's. But actually since then I have been in touch. It was a professor that I met through this conference. I don't remember the year, but it was years ago. Whenever I was helping David, he was from TCC. And I've been in touch with him on and off through my career, and I think he was really trying to start some peace building and conflict resolution programs there. I don't think that they have.
I don't know what's happened. Yeah.
Yeah, but he also, because recently, whenever I touched base with him when I got back to the U.S., he mentioned about talking to other professors on how to integrate peace building and conflict resolution already in their curriculum, their existing curriculum. So that was one way that he was talking about of integrating it and starting that way.
Thank you. Other questions? Anybody else? Yes, Annette?
Thank you.
Good.
I wanted to first say thank you for inviting students the way that you did. I'm a current student at Allegheny College of Maryland.
Excellent.
And it's the second associate's degree that I've worked on. The first one I received at a community college in office systems about 20 years ago. And it served me well in some areas, but technology changes constantly. And I live in Western Maryland now. And while I had experience as a domestic violence victims advocate, as a youth mentor and so forth, it wouldn't transfer to the jobs that I really wanted to do. I wanted to get into counseling and more like human services type things. So I was very fortunate to have some excellent advisors at the college, particularly, I don't know if anybody knows Annette Clark and Sherry Snyder from the CMBN community. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And they helped to guide me into the area that I'm looking at now, which is addictions counseling and human services. I'm also, the reason that I'm attending this particular conference is I got sort of talked into becoming the president of our Peace Club at the college. It used to be called Peace Studies Club, and now it's we changed it to Peace Club because we're more of an action rather than just research type of a college club. But I wanted to say that the community college, it's like, well, it is a community, and there's so much more one-on-one and the ability to interact not just with other students, but also with the instructors, advisors, pretty much everybody on campus. It's just a different atmosphere, I believe, than higher education can tend to be. I'm sure there are universities that are different than that, but I just wanted to let people that are teaching at the community college level that they're doing the great work of getting students that fall a little outside of the norm. Like myself, I'm 63, to, change careers and go back to school. At a university level, I think that might be just so intimidating, really. And this allows me to explore things and to decide, do I just want to go into the field or do I want to pursue something higher?
That's great. Thank you for that story, Annette. And it's good to hear your experiences at Allegheny College of Maryland, which I visited.
Great.
Any other questions? Any other comments, observations they'd like to make? Olivia.
Yeah, I had a question. At the community college, there's a big push right now to kind of connect majors with careers. And I wanted to ask you both if at the community college you had any assistance with your career path. And if not, what did you wish that you have in terms of like career counseling or embedded career curriculum to help you in your careers right now?
Ninette, Feather, they're up to you, your question.
I can go, I guess. So whenever I was at PCC, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I had no idea what exactly I wanted my career to be. I didn't even really know until like midway through my master's what I wanted to do. So even after I graduated with my bachelor's, I'm like, okay, so now what can I do? And then, you know, so I didn't really seek out the, I think I did talk to like one or two career, because I got my associates in psychology. I started off as an art major and then I switched it to psychology. And I did talk about, you know, since I was completely new to psychology, I was like, so what can I do? And I even met with professors just to know like, what are the options? Like even with an associate's or bachelor's, like what are the options that I can do? I think talking to professors really helped me. There was one professor, which is actually quite ironic since now I'm working in a juvenile detention center. The first thing that he mentioned to me was prison psychology. And for me, I was like, oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. You know, that might be something that I could do. And so, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's not a prison, of course, because it's for youth, but still, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So as far as career, I don't know if I can be really helpful in that aspect, but if I knew at the time, like if I knew that I was going to do peace building work and conflict resolution work, I definitely would have, you know, still wanted that same relationship, like talking to a professor, hearing from someone who either has a similar degree and what have they done in their career path, and just hearing about what are the options available to me.
Ninette?
For me, it was, I knew there was a career center, but I really never used it. I never went in, you know, to seek that service. But what I did, as Heather said, I talked to professors. For example, I remember when I got my internship at the Congresswoman Sherry Pengri, I went straight to a professor, one of my professors. I was like, it's great what we are studying and learning, but I will love if I can get, you know, my hands on something outside of the class. And she was really understanding. And actually that year, she was able to start this as an every year thing where she will help 2 students in her class to go out and do an internship whenever they want to do it. And it was the same as another internship that I was able to get. I think, yes, we did have a career center there, but I didn't use it. But at the same time, I feel like I didn't use it because I always, in my head, I always knew that I will transfer and go to another school. And second, I feel like since I was young, I always knew what I wanted to do or to be. It may not have been the same, but I'm still in the same area of what I always wanted to do. So maybe that also was one of the things I didn't use it.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else? We've got about 5 minutes and I want to get our full questions in. And I want both Ninette and Heather at the end to give us some advice of what they would advise people. Let's see, Jillian and then Carolyn. Jillian, you want to have another question?
I'm sorry, I kind of lost connection. I just popped back in, sorry.
Okay, Carolyn, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question for, and sort of a comment for, question for Heather. Do you remember the name of the instructor at TCC?
The one, which one? The one that I met in this conference?
Yeah.
Was it Robert
Katz, Robert Katz.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's still teaching there. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so my niece is in the seminar, Anna McManus. She went to TCC, and then where did you transfer to, Anna?
The University of Central Oklahoma.
Okay. And so I'm just curious about whether Professor Katz knows what you did, Heather.
Yeah, he knows. That's one of the reasons why I have been in touch with him. Because when I met him, I was in my master's and I was supporting David. He's like, hey, he just announced to the class, like, I'm doing this community college conference. Does anybody want help? I was like, yeah. I don't even think David knew that until I was at the conference that I went to college.
And I grabbed you at that point.
Yeah, now you're gonna say something. Because I just didn't think to say anything. I don't know why, but Robert Katz was there and I was in my master's and I was telling him, and I was like, oh, wow, there's someone from TCC here. And that's whenever I was like, hey, I went to TCC. And yeah, I told him about what I was doing. And yeah, I've been in touch with him, you know, on and off, like I said. And then I've recently reached back out to him when I came back to the US, and he mentioned something about doing a research program and stuff like this. So, and I told him I'm always happy to support in that. Yeah, so yeah, he definitely knows.
I just think it would be wonderful. You talk to students for your entire career and you never know what happens to them most of the time.
Yeah.
And it would be so nice for your instructors, Ninette, to know where you took this. Mm-hmm. That you picked up the thread and you carried it on.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's reaffirming for faculty to know that. I mean, it's not like we have to take a lot of credit, but it's nice to know that, yeah, that there was something that came out of what happened in this experience that was valuable. You know, sometimes we lose that. That's why you should always call your first grade teacher and tell them what you're doing. Remind them where you are today, right? Any maybe one more question, and then I'm going to ask Heather and Ninette to give some kind of final advice. Anybody else? Yes, Logan.
Hi. So
Logan.
I know, I was so excited to see you. For people who don't know, we were in the disaster simulation put on by the Forage Center together. So I saw Ninette and I heard her voice. I was like, is that the same Ninette? So I'm very glad to see you again.
See you too.
So my question is, for those of us who are looking towards, who see their careers as taking them abroad internationally, in reference to what you were saying about wherever you go, the first thing you are is yourself. How do you balance between being who you are and also being the representative of the communities that produced you?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say to that I feel like if you go somewhere and you try to be someone else, that community you are going to, we always know. And believe me, I learned this from our I don't know if we have some Native Americans here in the audience, but working with them, for example, if they ask you, how are you? They don't want to hear, oh, good, thank you. And you, no, how really are you? So being able to just be yourself in that new community you're going to, you know, let me say, Logan, you come, you know, in the hometown I was born in and grew up in Burundi. You know, if you get there, if you are you as a human being, whatever package you're bringing with you, people we want to work with you, people we want to be with you and relate to your story, and you know. But if you come and try to, you know, sugarloaf whatever, they're gonna feel it, and that it's one thing really I have learned myself, you know, because sometimes you feel like, oh, I want to be like this person or these people, I don't, you know. But if you are really know you, the people who are around you gonna feel it, and they will know. Just be yourself and represent the community you're coming from by just being you. Those who are there will figure out the rest.
Heather, you want to add anything quickly?
Yeah, just quickly. Thanks, Annette. That was, I completely agree with that too. Just real quick as well, like if you, like, I think if you show a genuine interest in another culture, and you can benefit from this, right? Like if you can be yourself completely, as Ninette said, and also share different things about your culture, learn things about their culture, but not only, it's not one way, right? So not saying like, oh, well, this is how we do things in the US or you know, so really trying to learn from their culture and being very receptive in that way.
So thank you both. What final advice, Ninette and Heather, would you give to the students that are in the room, not the faculty, to the students that are still here? What kind of advice would you give them?
If you really want to go to this world of, or to the career of peace building or humanitarian work, what I will advise is back to really trying to be who you are and appreciate where you are going to work. I go back to, for example, let me say you just got a job at, I don't know, let me say maybe UNICEF, and then they send you to work at Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. You know, now you are in a place completely different. I just will say, be you, try to show that you are there not just to do your work, but also to learn from the community you're going to work to. If they sit down in the dirt, don't be afraid, do it, you know, because that's how really we're gonna all, as human, be able to do the work in peace building. Yeah.
Heather.
I would say that this might sound a little bit cliche, but it's really true. That it's a lot of work if you want to be in this field, in the peace building field. You have to have a lot of different types of experience and also be willing to do a lot of volunteer experiences. If you want to work internationally and you don't have that international experience, you really have to be willing to take some volunteer opportunities to get that experience and to build up your international career in that sense, and be willing to do that. And actually, from volunteer experiences, for me, I've learned a lot from my volunteer experiences, and I love it. If I could volunteer full time, I would actually. Unfortunately, I have to, eat and pay my bills. So yeah, I would just be willing to do that. And the journey will have ups and downs for sure, and just keep sticking it out. And sometimes you're like, oh, am I ever going to get there? Am I ever going to be able to be hired by the UN, or even if you don't want to work for the UN, if you want to work for local NGOs, they look for a certain amount of experience. So in reaching out to people, networking, also informational interviews are really helpful. I know David could also speak about that more too, but yeah, so trying to seek any kind of information, like this conference is a great start too.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. If Heather and Ninette, if you could put your contact information in the chat box, that would be great. A round of applause for both of them. That was really wonderful. So thank you all. We are done the first day. Students, we will see you back next Friday. Faculty, administrators, and staff, we will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at peace education and humanitarian education. Darren Cambridge will be with us tomorrow. So some of you will remember Darren. He comes every year. He will be talking tomorrow. And then Jess Bonham-White from the Forage Center will be speaking also. And then students, we will see you next week. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for taking this time out. I hope this worked out for everyone. And then faculty, tomorrow, I'll be back in the room about 11:15 if you want to come in early and chat a little bit, and we can even do a little bit of debriefing if you'd like. It's really your prerogative. And then we'll be back on then tomorrow from 12 to 2 Eastern time. So thank you for now, and I will close the meeting out, and thank you. Have a great rest of your day.